They said it was too loud, too heavy, too wild to live. They said no sane person needed that much power under their right foot. But Plymouth didn't build the 1970 HEMI Cuda for sanity. They built it to make history. Beneath its trembling shaker hood sat the 4 to 6 cubic inch HEMI. Nicknamed the elephant for one reason: its size, its strength, and its unstoppable roar. It wasn't just an engine. It was a declaration of war on limits. In 1970, this beast terrified insurers, outran police interceptors, and shattered every idea of what an American car could be. And yet, what was once too powerful to sell, too wild to insure, too brutal for the streets, is now worth over $3 million. This is the story of how a machine born in rebellion became a masterpiece of history, the legend of the 1970 Plymouth HEMI Cuda. The car that refused to die. The world was changing in 1970. Woodstock had faded. The space race was in full swing, and America's streets echoed not with protest chants, but with the deep, guttural rumble of V8 engines. It was the golden age of horsepower, when pride was measured not by money, but by cubic inches. In that fierce arena of Detroit rivalry, one name would rise above them all: the Plymouth HEMI Cuda. It wasn't just another car. It was a loaded statement that Plymouth, the so-called budget brand, could build a monster so wild it would terrify even the mighty. Mustang and Camaro. Plymouth didn't start this fight quietly. They took Chrysler's most dangerous weapon, the 426 cubic inch HEMI V8, an engine bred for NASCAR tracks, and they dropped it into their smallest, angriest body, the Barracuda. The result was the 1970 Plymouth HEMI Cuda, a street-legal grenade with a fuse barely long enough to light. The 426 HEMI wasn't a normal engine. It was a phenomenon. Its hemispherical combustion chambers, the HEMI design, let it breathe better than anything on the road. Two huge Carter 4-barrel carburetors fed it air and fuel in a perfect storm of explosive efficiency. A forged steel crankshaft and heavy-duty connecting rods meant it could rev like a race engine while still surviving the abuse of drag racing launches. On paper, Plymouth claimed 425 horsepower, but the truth was closer to 470, and the torque, enough to twist driveshafts and humiliate anything that dared pull up next to it at a red light. No wonder they called it the elephant. It was big, loud, and impossible to ignore. Slide behind the wheel of a HEMI Cuda, and you felt the difference before you even turned the key. That tall shaker hood scoop quivered like it was breathing, rising straight out of the engine bay to gulp cold air the moment you stabbed the throttle. The pistol grip shifter waited like a weapon in your hand. Every part of the car was engineered to contain violence. The Dana 60 rear axle could take the punishment. The heavy-duty suspension kept it from ripping itself apart, and the 4-speed manual transmission let drivers wrestle every ounce of that torque. It wasn't refined. It was raw power given shape. At idle, the car shook. At speed, it screamed. Driving one was less like controlling a car and more like trying to tame a storm. But the Cuda's power came with a price, and not just the one on its sticker. A brand new HEMI Cuda in 1970 cost around $4,000. But insurance companies saw the word HEMI, and their calculators caught fire. Premiums tripled. Parents warned their sons to stay away from it. Dealers whispered that these cars were too much for the street. And they were right. The first time you slammed the throttle, the rear tires spun into smoke. The front end lifted, and the car fought you like it was alive. It was a machine that punished hesitation and rewarded courage. That was its curse and its greatness. Most people didn't understand the HEMI Cuda. It was too raw, too aggressive, too honest for a world that was slowly moving toward safety and efficiency. In 1970, as emissions laws tightened and fuel prices climbed, the HEMI Cuda sounded like a dinosaur from a louder, bolder time. It was the last glimpse of an era when cars weren't built to conform. They were built to defy. Yet beneath that rebellion was art. Every bolt in a HEMI Cuda spoke of craftsmanship and madness in equal measure. The shaker hood wasn't just for show. It fed the car's lung with cold air. The massive Dana 60 rear end was borrowed from drag racing cars because nothing else could handle the torque. The HEMI's aluminum valve covers gleamed like armor plates. Even the paint options had attitude colors like lemon twist yellow and plum crazy purple. Because nothing about this car was meant to be subtle, for the few who were brave enough to own one. The HEMI Cuda was a religious experience. They talked about it the way pilots talked about jet fighters, with respect tinged with fear. On the drag strip, it was a monster. Quarter-mile runs in the low 13-second range were routine. And in the right hands. Some cars even dipped into the 12s. Racers who lined up against it said it was like challenging a thunderstorm. No matter how ready you were, you always felt small when that HEMI roared. But as 1970 slid into the next decade, the world changed faster than the Cuda could run. Gas prices spiked. Emissions laws cut horsepower. Insurance companies turned every fast car into a financial trap. The HEMI Cuda was suddenly too loud for its own time, a beast with no place to roam. Plymouth quietly discontinued it, building only a handful of HEMI models. And of those, only a few convertibles were ever made. The era of the muscle car was dying, and with it, the HEMI Cuda disappeared, a ghost of a generation that refused to slow down. Yet, even as it faded, it left a trail of rumors and reverence. Collectors started to hunt for them, whispering stories of garage-kept examples that had never seen rain. The very qualities that made it a failure in 1970, its price, its power, its madness, were now the reasons it would become a legend. Because while other cars were built to be driven, the HEMI Cuda was built to be remembered. And that's the twist of this story. A car too loud for its time became the quiet treasure of history. The same 426 HEMI that once emptied gas tanks and broke axles now fills auction halls with silence and awe. People don't race them anymore, they worship them. Every time a HEMI Cuda fires up today, it's not just an engine starting. It's a ghost roaring back to life, reminding the world that power, real power, never goes out of style. For a car that was once called too wild for the streets, the end came in silence. In the early 1970s, the American dream of unrestrained horsepower collapsed almost overnight. Gas prices skyrocketed, emission laws strangled performance, and insurance companies waged war on speed. Dealerships that once proudly displayed the 1970 Plymouth HEMI Cuda now struggled to give them away. Cars that could outrun almost anything were now gathering dust, parked at the back of lots, unwanted and misunderstood. It was a strange twist of fate. The same qualities that made the HEMI Cuda unforgettable also made it impossible to sell. It was expensive, temperamental, and drank fuel like a jet engine. But what no one realized at the time was that every unsold Cuda, every one that sat unloved in a corner of America, was quietly becoming a future relic. Time would turn their rejection into gold. The oil crisis hit in 1973, and muscle cars vanished like smoke. Plymouth phased out the HEMI engine. Government regulations made it nearly impossible to build anything that raw again. The HEMI Cuda was gone, its thunder replaced by the quiet hum of fuel-efficient compacts. The era of wild American muscle was over. But legends don't die, they sleep. Decades passed. The world changed. Cars became smarter, safer, quieter. But deep down, enthusiasts longed for something more primal, a connection to the days when machines had souls, when the road was dangerous and thrilling. That longing brought people back to the HEMI Cuda. Collectors started hunting for survivors. Those few cars that had escaped the scrapyard or survived decades hidden in barns. And when the first restored HEMI Cuda roared to life again, it didn't just turn heads, it turned the clock back. The rediscovery of the 1970 HEMI Cuda became a phenomenon. Car shows treated it like royalty. Auction houses whispered about it in reverence. What was once a $4,000 car was suddenly fetching 6 figures, then 7. And when one of the ultra-rare 1970 HEMI Cuda convertibles went under the hammer, one of only 14 ever built, the bidding war was unlike anything the muscle car world had seen. When the gavel finally fell, the price was jaw-dropping. Over $3 million. How did a car that was once too extreme for its time become one of the most valuable cars in the world? The answer lies in what it represents. The HEMI Cuda isn't just a car, it's a rebellion frozen in metal. It's the last breath of an age when engineers were dreamers and risk-takers. When the smell of burning rubber was the smell of freedom. Every inch of the HEMI Cuda tells that story. The trembling shaker hood, the deep burble of the 426 elephant engine, the unapologetic power that feels almost human in its flaws. Collectors don't just buy a HEMI Cuda, they buy a heartbeat. They buy history. They buy the story of an underdog brand that built something so powerful it scared the industry into submission. They buy the sound of rebellion, that low, growling idle that makes everything around it stop. And when they lift the hood and see the massive HEMI valve covers gleaming under the light, they're not looking at steel. They're looking at immortality. But there's another twist, something poetic in how time flipped the narrative. Back in 1970, people laughed at the Cuda's shaker hood, its fuel hunger, its brutal handling. They said it was impractical, overbuilt, and unnecessary. But now, those same things are exactly why it's worth millions. Because in a world of digital perfection, the Cuda is gloriously imperfect, raw, mechanical, alive. It's everything modern cars forgot how to be. Each of the 14 HEMI Cuda convertibles has its own legend. Some sat forgotten in dusty barns for decades before being discovered and restored to glory. Others were raced, wrecked, rebuilt, and resurrected like phoenixes from the ashes. One sold at Barrett-Jackson for over $3.5 million. Another crossed $4 million in a private sale. And every time one surfaces, the automotive world goes silent, because people know they're not watching a sale. They're witnessing a piece of living history change hands. The 4-6 HEMI engine, the same elephant that once scared insurance companies, has become a sacred symbol. Even today, the DNA of that engine runs through Dodge's Hellcat, Demon, and Super stock models. But no matter how much horsepower modern cars make, none of them carry the same soul. The 1970 HEMI Cuda didn't just move fast, it made people feel something. It made them believe in impossible machines. When you stand next to a HEMI Cuda today, you don't just see a car, you see an attitude. You see the last stand of unfiltered power before the world became cautious. Its long hood, its wide stance, and its shaker scoop still command respect half a century later. And when that 426 HEMI roars to life, it's not just noise. It's the sound of defiance, echoing through time. From the streets of 1972, the auction blocks of today. The HEMI Cuda has completed a full circle from outlaw to masterpiece. The very thing that made it dangerous made it timeless. Its rarity, its roar, its rebellion all forged together into one $3 million legend. It's not the money that makes it valuable. It's what it represents: courage, excess, freedom, and the unrepeatable madness of an era that dared to chase perfection through raw power. The 1970 HEMI Cuda didn't just break records, it broke the mold. It proved that sometimes the things that don't fit in are the ones remembered forever. Once, it was the car people were afraid to drive. Now, it's the car people would sell everything to own. And every time an auctioneer's hammer falls and a HEMI Cuda finds a new home, It whispers one simple truth through the rumble of its 426 elephant engine. Real legends don't fade, they just get louder.